Hey everyone, this is Iron Nicodemus with The Most Interested Man, and today we're doing the second part in our video series on restoring this classic Remington 1900 side-by-side shotgun. If you haven't watched our original intro video, be sure to do that. We talk about the history of the gun, kind of the last project I did, and be sure to like this video if you like it, and subscribe as well for more coming up in this series as we follow along in restoring this gun. And what I want to talk about today is one of the first projects that we did, and that was removing a barrel dent from this barrel. See, when you look at this gun, this is a 100-some-year-old gun, and shotgun barrels are pretty thin. So at some point in its life, someone had, closed it in a truck door, swung around and hit something. There was something that caused a pretty good dent. It was up here, and I really wanted to make sure that I addressed it, because to fix one of these dents the right way, you're going to have to polish some stuff out afterwards. So I didn't want to do this after the fact. It was one of the first things that I wanted to do. Now, unfortunately, this dent wasn't just kind of a gradual dent. Sometimes you'll see dents in shotguns where the metal itself isn't really creased, and kind of what it is just like a more gradual thing. And those are easier to get out. This case, there was a little bit of a dent, but then there was also kind of this damage to the metal where it was really dented down in a specific spot. So I had a couple things that I had to deal with. Well, how do you get rid of a dent in a shotgun barrel? There's a couple ways. So there's a hydraulic dent remover, and you can buy these. They're very expensive, $400 or $500. They come in each specific gauge, so it's a big investment. And you can also rent these. I think they're about $60 if you want to just rent one. So that was one option, but didn't really even want to do that. I'm trying to do this as a pretty low budget, kind of more of a learning experience to work through this gun. It's not a high value gun. It's not a Parker, an LC Smith. So I said, hey, I don't want to spend the money if I can do that. The second option is you can make your own dent razor. And there's a lot of information about this online as well as in old gunsmithing books. Generally what you do is you take and you split a piece of metal, you run it through a threaded rod, and you pull that together so it expands out. In order to do that, you really do need to have a lathe, a milling machine, a little bit more stuff. I do not have all that. So I said, well, what's the other option? So I spent some time here on YouTube, and I found someone who suggested something that I said, you know what, I'll give that a shot. And overall, I'm pretty happy with how the results came out. So what they did was they suggested taking a piece of metal, and in this case, what I did was I got an adapter for my socket set, and I found something that was just a little bit smaller than the bore. Now this is a 16 gauge, so it's going to be different depending on what you have. But this adapter already had this slope that was built into it here, and it just about fit in here. So what I did is I took this brass cleaning rod. I didn't want to use something that was going to damage the barrel, so I used this as I was pushing through. And what you do is you oil it up and you put it in, and you're just basically driving it in underneath the dent. Now, if you get these to where they're just a little bit under, then it should go through, but when it hits that dent, that's enough of a constriction where you'll feel it. You'll feel when it gets hung up. So as you start to drive it through that, it's gonna expand around that initial dent. Now what you don't wanna do is there's gonna be a constriction here in the last couple inches that you're choked. You don't wanna drive this thing all the way through. In this case, I was right up here, so I just made sure that I knew where I was from the end of the muzzle. So I knew when I was underneath that, and once I was past, I backed it out. Well, you might be able to do this if you're lucky with something that's a perfect fit. What you're probably gonna have to do is build it up. And the way to do that was I used some tin foil. So tin foil doesn't seem like it's very thick at all, but when you put one or two layers around here, you're adding just enough that it's gonna put a little bit more on here. And when you pass it through, you can feel that resistance, and you're gonna push that dent out a little bit more. So I did this 2 or 3 times, and it started to lift that dent. But the problem was I still had the issue with where the metal had been creased. So what do you do about that? Well, one of the best ways to do it is to get some sort of hammer. Now, if you were not rebluing this gun, you'd want to use a brass hammer because it's going to do less damage to the actual finish itself. In this case, I'm planning to completely strip this down and reblue it, so I wasn't worried about that. So I used a metal hammer, a little ball peen hammer. So what I did was I drove this in, and I made sure that it was underneath. You don't want to do this without the support underneath. And then basically what happens is I took this, and just little by little, I'm hitting it with the hammer, and by hitting around it, you start to flatten and almost lift the area that's in there. Now, I'll show you the detail of kind of where it is, but it's not quite perfect. I'd say that I'm pretty happy with where I came out. And then what I'm going to do is I start to do the polishing. I did a little bit of filing last night. I don't want to take too much off of here because I don't want to thin out the wall, but just enough to blend it in. And then when I start to go into emery cloth and sandpaper, my hope is that as this starts to kind of take out the variance here, you'll still be able to see it a little bit. With these that are creased in the metal, it's really hard to get them completely out, but I think it's going to be a lot better than it was and close enough for this old shotgun and bringing it back to life. Hopefully this has been helpful for you. If you do want to do this, make sure that you just have the right tools, go slow. Everything's very little as far as your movements. Don't force anything too much, use lots of oil, but just by using something as simple as a socket set adapter, you can save yourself a bunch of time and money. Take this out and restore an old shotgun back to like new. Hope you enjoyed this video today. Like I said, be sure to subscribe for the next ones, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks and take care.